When her grandmother gifted her a hotel worth $500 million, her mother-in-law and her husband immediately reacted, "Tomorrow, we will take care of the hotel. If you object, you will be divorced." At that very moment, she burst out laughing, because she wasn't an ordinary woman, and they were about to learn exactly who they were trying to control. Hi, my beautiful, loyal, and great family. Welcome back to your own family channel, Mr. Peter's Stories. Today, I send a prayer wrapped in pure love and deep respect for every woman listening. May the Almighty surround your life with honor that no one can touch, comfort that never leaves, and blessings that flow like a river without end. Women carry the world with quiet strength. They heal with their kindness. They rise after storms meant to break them, and still give love as if their hearts were made of light. I pray your steps become easier, your nights become peaceful, and your soul receives every blessing it has been patiently waiting for. May you be protected, uplifted, cherished, and loved the way you truly deserve. Your worth is beyond diamonds, beyond crowns, beyond anything this world can measure. If you believe women deserve the highest respect, like the video. If you stand with love, write, "I am with Mr. Peter. Let's start with love." When her grandmother gifted her a hotel worth $500 million, her mother-in-law and her husband immediately reacted. "Tomorrow, we will take care of the hotel. If you object, you will be divorced." At that very moment, she burst out laughing, because she wasn't an ordinary woman, and they were about to learn exactly who they were trying to control. The lawyer's voice droned through the final paragraphs of the will. Carolyn Jennings sat perfectly still on the cream sofa, hands folded in her lap, watching dust particles drift through afternoon sunlight. Attorney Robert Brennan adjusted his reading glasses and cleared his throat before delivering the words that would detonate the next 3 years of her life. "To my beloved granddaughter, Carolyn Jennings, I leave the entirety of Heritage Grand Hotel, valued at $500 million, along with all associated assets, properties, and investment portfolios. This bequest is made solely to Carolyn, with no joint ownership, no spousal claim, and no managerial access granted to any third party without her explicit written consent." The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. Anthony Jackson, Carolyn's husband of 5 years, exchanged a glance with his mother, Diane, who sat rigid in the armchair across from them. Carolyn watched the wordless communication pass between them. The slight raise of Diane's eyebrow, the almost imperceptible nod from Anthony. She had seen this pattern 1,000 times before. Mother and son united in their calculations, already planning their next move. Diane stood first, smoothing her burgundy dress with practiced movements. Her voice carried the careful modulation of someone used to getting her way through charm rather than force. "Mr. Brennan, I assume there are management documents that need signing. My son has extensive experience in commercial real estate. I'm sure Carolyn would appreciate guidance during this transition. It must be overwhelming for her." Robert Brennan's expression remained professionally neutral. "Mrs. Jackson, the will is quite clear. Heritage Grand belongs exclusively to Carolyn. Any management decisions are hers alone to make." Anthony rose from the sofa, his movements measured. When he spoke, his tone was reasonable, almost gentle, the voice he used when he wanted to sound protective rather than controlling. "Carolyn doesn't have experience running a hotel of this magnitude. Mr. Brennan, surely you understand the practical concerns here. Tomorrow morning, I should meet with the hotel board to ensure continuity of operations. We'll need the financial records transferred so I can review them properly." He still hadn't looked at his wife. He addressed the lawyer as though Carolyn were a child who needed adults to handle complicated matters. Carolyn felt something cold and crystalline form in her chest. Not anger. She had moved past simple anger months ago during those long afternoons when her grandmother explained exactly what Anthony was and what he had been doing. This was clarity, surgical and precise, cutting through years of self-doubt and manufactured helplessness. "You think I need your permission?" The words came out soft, almost conversational. Anthony finally turned to her, and for just a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or concern that she was deviating from the script of their marriage. "Carolyn, be realistic. I'm trying to help you. This hotel represents an enormous responsibility. You've never managed anything like this before." Diane moved closer, and the scent of her expensive perfume filled the space between them. Her smile was warm, maternal even, but her eyes remained calculating. "Sweetheart, we're family. We want what's best for you. You know Anthony has been handling investments and business decisions for years. He's good at this. Let him take care of the complicated parts so you don't have to worry." Carolyn's laugh started quiet, barely more than a breath. Then it grew, filling the room with a sound that made Robert Brennan shift uncomfortably and caused a deep flush to creep up Anthony's neck. "What's so funny?" Anthony's voice had lost its gentle quality, replaced by something sharper. "You are." Carolyn stood and walked to the window, looking out at the manicured lawn, the imported Japanese maple trees her mother-in-law had chosen, the iron gates that had felt like prison bars for 3 years. "You really believe I'm going to hand over my inheritance because you've decided you should manage it?" "If you don't—" Anthony stopped himself, visibly trying to control his tone. "Carolyn, you're not thinking clearly. This is emotional. Your grandmother just passed away. You shouldn't be making major decisions when you're grieving." "He's right," Diane added quickly. "Why don't we all take a few days to process everything? Then we can sit down calmly and work out the best arrangement." But Carolyn heard what they weren't saying. The implicit threat underneath the reasonable words. The assumption that she would eventually comply because she always had before. The belief that her grief made her vulnerable and manageable. Anthony's voice dropped into a register she recognized, the one that sounded like concern but functioned as intimidation. "I'm trying to protect you. If you refuse to be sensible about this, I'll have no choice but to protect myself. File for divorce. You understand what that means. The house, the lifestyle you're accustomed to, all of it goes away. You'll have the hotel, but without me managing it properly, you'll run it into bankruptcy within a year. Is that what you want? To lose everything because of pride?" Diane nodded, her expression sorrowful, as though Anthony's threats pained her. "We're not trying to hurt you, dear. We're trying to prevent you from hurting yourself. Sign the management papers. Let Anthony handle the business side. You keep the ownership, maintain your comfortable life, and everyone benefits. That's what your grandmother would have wanted. Family taking care of family." Carolyn turned from the window. Something in her expression made Anthony take an involuntary step backward. Her smile was cold, her eyes absolutely clear, and for the first time in their marriage, she looked at him without any trace of uncertainty or deference. "I'll sign something tomorrow," she said quietly, each word deliberate, "but not what you expect." She walked past them, past the lawyer still clutching his briefcase, and climbed the stairs to the second floor. Behind her, she heard Diane's sharp whisper, "What does she mean by that?" Anthony's response was dismissive, but Carolyn detected an edge of doubt underneath it. "She's trying to sound strong. It won't last. By tomorrow, she'll realize she has no choice. She always realizes that eventually." Carolyn reached the bedroom and locked the door behind her. The room was decorated in shades of white and beige, colors Diane had insisted were sophisticated when they'd moved into this house. Carolyn had always thought they looked sterile, like a hospital room designed to drain personality from whoever inhabited it. She walked to the closet and pushed aside hanging dresses until she reached the back wall. Her fingers found the small panel she had installed herself 2 years ago, pressing until it clicked open with a soft sound. Inside the hidden compartment sat 3 folders, each one representing a different weapon in the war. She hadn't realized she was preparing to fight until her grandmother had opened her eyes. The first folder contained contracts, management agreements for 3 boutique hotels she had been running quietly under her grandmother's guidance. Shell companies and trust structures kept Carolyn's name off public records. Anthony had no idea that his wife spent her days making decisions about staffing, renovations, vendor negotiations, and guest services. He thought she had lunch with friends and went shopping. He had never asked what she actually did with her time, because he had never imagined she might be doing anything meaningful. The second folder held bank statements, accounts in her name alone, funded by profits from those 3 hotels. The amounts weren't enormous. Her grandmother had been careful about that, not wanting to trigger Anthony's attention with sudden wealth, but it was enough. Enough to leave. Enough to start over. Enough to fight if fighting became necessary. The third folder was the weapon her grandmother had spent 18 months forging. Financial records documenting every penny Anthony had moved, hidden, or stolen over the past 5 years. Her grandmother had hired forensic accountants after noticing inconsistencies in Anthony's business dealings, suspecting that the successful construction company he claimed to run was not quite what it appeared to be. The accountants had found embezzlement, fraud, and forged signatures. Anthony's signature and, more damningly, Carolyn's signature on documents she had never seen, let alone signed. Anthony had been stealing from his own company, hiding money in accounts under his mother's name, and using Carolyn's anticipated inheritance as collateral for loans he never intended to repay. He had built his entire lifestyle on fraud, and he had dragged Carolyn's name into his crimes without her knowledge or consent. Carolyn spread the documents across the bed and photographed each page methodically with her phone. She sent the images to Preston Caldwell, the attorney her grandmother had retained for her months ago. His response came within minutes. "Everything is ready. Tomorrow morning, we execute the plan. They won't know what happened until it's already over." She returned the folders to their hiding place and changed into comfortable clothes. Downstairs, she could hear Anthony and Diane talking, their voices carrying that particular tone of people convinced they have everything under control. They were planning how to spend her money, how to manage her inheritance, how to keep her contained and compliant. Carolyn looked at herself in the mirror. Her reflection showed a woman who had been underestimated so thoroughly and for so long that her enemies had forgotten to consider what might happen if she ever stopped accepting their assessment of her capabilities. Tomorrow, Anthony would walk into Heritage Grand Hotel expecting to take control of a fortune. Instead, he would walk into a trap that had been 3 years in the making, since the day her grandmother had pulled her aside and said, "I see what's happening to you, and we're going to fix it, but you have to be patient and you have to be smart." Carolyn smiled at her reflection. "I was patient. I was smart. Now it's time to show them exactly who I am." Chapter 2. The trap they walked into morning broke cold and overcast, the kind of grey sky that promised rain by afternoon. Anthony Jackson stood in front of the hallway mirror, straightening his tie with meticulous precision. The silk was expensive. Everything about Anthony's appearance suggested success and authority. It was a carefully maintained illusion, but one he had been operating behind for so long that sometimes even he believed it was real. Diane emerged from the guest bedroom where she had stayed overnight. She looked tired, shadows under her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept well. "She didn't come down for breakfast," Diane observed, her tone carrying less certainty than it had yesterday. "Do you think she's actually going to fight this?" "With what?" Anthony grabbed his briefcase, but his movements were slightly less confident than usual. "She doesn't have lawyers. She doesn't have business experience. She doesn't even have friends who could help her. We made sure of that. By noon today, I'll have operational control of Heritage Grand, and this whole ridiculous situation will be resolved." They climbed into Anthony's black sedan, Diane in the passenger seat. Their lawyer, Bernard Mills, followed in his own vehicle. Bernard had been Anthony's attorney for 3 years, helping him structure various business dealings in ways that kept certain activities obscured from regulators and tax authorities. He was expensive, but he was good at making problems disappear. The drive to Heritage Grand took 30 minutes through downtown traffic. Anthony spent the time making phone calls, already positioning himself as the hotel's new manager. "Yes, I'll be taking over operations today. My wife inherited the property, but she'll be a silent owner. All business decisions will go through me from now on." He didn't notice the subtle hesitation in some of the responses, the way people seemed to be choosing their words carefully. He was too focused on his own plans to hear warning bells. Heritage Grand Hotel rose 20 stories above the financial district, its Art Deco facade gleaming even under the overcast sky. Anthony pulled into the executive parking garage, noting with satisfaction that they had reserved a spot for him near the elevator. The hotel staff was already treating him appropriately. Inside, the lobby was elegant and busy with morning check-ins. The hotel manager, Mr. Ashford, waited near the elevators. He was a thin man in his 50s, with wire-rimmed glasses and an expression that revealed nothing. "Mr. Jackson, Mrs. Jackson." He nodded to each of them with formal courtesy. "Mrs. Carolyn Jackson called earlier. She's running slightly late but asked that you wait in the second-floor conference room." Diane's eyebrows rose slightly. "We're here to begin the transition of management. Perhaps we should start reviewing operational documents while we wait." Mr. Ashford's expression didn't change. "I'll need to verify Mrs. Jackson's instructions before releasing any confidential materials. Please follow me to the conference room." Something in his tone made Anthony uneasy, but he pushed the feeling aside. Hotel managers were naturally protective of their employers. Once the management transfer was completed, Mr. Ashford would adjust to the new reality quickly enough. The conference room was glass-walled with views overlooking the lobby. Bernard Mills joined them, setting his briefcase on the polished table with practiced efficiency. "This shouldn't take long. Once your wife arrives, we'll have her sign the management transfer documents, and you'll have full operational authority. I've drafted everything to ensure legal clarity." Anthony settled into the chair at the head of the table. It felt right, sitting there. This was where he belonged. In control, making decisions, managing assets. Carolyn could keep the title of owner if it made her feel important. He would handle the real work. "We should start without her," Anthony said after 10 minutes had passed. "Bring me the financial reports for the last quarter. I want to see the hotel's current position before we discuss restructuring." Mr. Ashford, who had remained standing near the doorway, spoke quietly. "I'll need Mrs. Jackson's authorization for that level of access." "I'm her husband." Anthony's voice carried an edge now. "I don't need separate authorization to review my wife's business holdings." "Nevertheless," Mr. Ashford replied with unchanged courtesy, "I have specific instructions. Please excuse me." He disappeared into the hallway, leaving them waiting. Diane paced to the windows, looking down at the lobby activity below. "Something feels wrong," she said quietly. "He's too calm. The staff isn't acting like people who are about to have new management imposed on them." Anthony checked his watch again. Where was Carolyn? This wasn't like her. For 5 years, she had been punctual, compliant, and predictable. This delay felt intentional, which didn't match his understanding of who his wife was. Across the city, in a completely different building, Carolyn sat in a leather chair in the executive conference room of Grandmont Investment Bank. 3 board members faced her across the mahogany table. Director Hammond, a silver-haired man who had worked with her grandmother for 20 years, Ms. Torres, the bank's chief legal officer, and Mr. Chen, head of asset management. Director Hammond smiled, and there was satisfaction in it. "The timing is perfect. Your grandmother planned this exact scenario. She knew that once Anthony learned about the hotel, he would move quickly to try to seize control." Carolyn slid a folder across the table. "He's at Heritage Grand right now, with Diane and Bernard Mills. They're expecting me to show up, sign papers, and hand over management. They think I'm frightened and alone." Ms. Torres opened the folder, scanning the documents inside with the practiced eye of someone who had reviewed thousands of legal agreements. "These are Anthony's business accounts and loan documents. The evidence of embezzlement is substantial. How did your grandmother acquire all of this?" "She hired investigators 2 years ago," Carolyn explained, "when she noticed inconsistencies in Anthony's stories about his business success. The investigators found everything: offshore accounts, shell companies, fraudulent loan applications using my forged signature. My grandmother spent months building an airtight case." Mr. Chen pulled up something on his tablet, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. We've prepared the secondary accounts as instructed. On your authorization, we'll execute the financial pressure campaign. Every major creditor Anthony has will simultaneously call in their loans. His business partner will panic. His investors will flee. By the time he understands what's happening, his company will be in free fall. Carolyn took a deep breath. This was the moment. Once she gave this order, there would be no going back. Anthony's business would collapse. His reputation would be destroyed. His life as he knew it would end. She thought about 5 years of being dismissed, diminished and controlled. 5 years of being told she was incapable of basic competence. 5 years of watching her own personality slowly erode under constant criticism disguised as concern. "Do it," she said clearly. "Activate everything." Director Hammond pressed a button on his phone. "Initiate sequence 7. "Confirmed," a voice responded from the speaker. "Activating now. All creditors are being contacted simultaneously. Estimated time until Mr. Jackson receives first notification, 3 minutes." Back at Heritage Grand, Anthony's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and saw his business partner's name. "Frank, I'm in a meeting. This needs to be quick." Frank Delaney's voice came through, strained and confused. "Anthony, something's happening. Westside Lending just called in our construction loan. They want full payment within 30 days. They're saying something about financial instability concerns, but we refinanced that loan 6 months ago with solid terms. What's going on?" Anthony felt his stomach drop. That doesn't make sense. There must be some mistake. Did they specify what concerns? No, just that their risk management team made a decision. But Anthony, that's not all. Harbor Bank sent a demand letter for the equipment financing while I was still on the phone with Westside. 2 major creditors within 5 minutes of each other. That's not coincidence. I'll call them and sort this out. It's obviously some kind of administrative error. He ended the call and immediately dialed Westside Lending, but his hands were shaking slightly as he held the phone. Diane watched him, her expression shifting from confidence to concern. The woman who answered transferred him 3 times before he finally reached someone with authority. "Mr. Jackson, we've received concerning information about your company's financial stability. Our risk management team has determined that immediate loan repayment is necessary to protect our interests." "What information?" Anthony demanded. "My company is perfectly stable. We have ongoing contracts, solid revenue, everything is fine. I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics of our risk assessment. You'll receive formal documentation by courier this afternoon." Anthony's phone buzzed with another incoming call. Then another. Diane's phone rang. Bernard's phone lit up. The conference room suddenly filled with the sound of multiple devices all receiving urgent communications simultaneously. Bernard answered his call, listened for a moment, and his face went pale. "I understand. Yes, I'll look into it immediately." He ended the call and looked at Anthony with something approaching alarm. "That was my office. The district attorney's office has requested copies of several loan documents related to your business dealings, documents bearing your wife's signature." "So what?" Diane said, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Spouses sign documents for each other all the time." "Not when they don't know about them," Bernard said quietly. "Not when the signature is potentially forged." The word hung in the air like poison. Anthony stared at his lawyer, his mind racing. How could anyone know about those documents? They were buried in layers of corporate paperwork, deliberately obscured. Unless someone had been specifically looking, unless someone had hired investigators, unless... "This is Carolyn," he said, and his voice came out barely above a whisper. "She's doing this. Somehow, she's doing this." The conference room door opened, and Mr. Ashford appeared. "Mrs. Carolyn Jackson has arrived. She's in the executive boardroom with her attorney and would like you to join her there." Anthony stood on legs that suddenly felt unsteady. This wasn't how the morning was supposed to go. He was supposed to be in control. He was supposed to be managing the situation. Instead, he felt like someone who had just stepped onto quicksand without realizing it. They followed Mr. Ashford through Heritage Grand's elegant corridors, past artwork and architectural details that Carolyn's grandmother had personally selected. When they reached the executive boardroom and the door opened, Anthony stopped completely. Carolyn sat at the head of a long mahogany table, wearing a steel-grey suit he had never seen before. Her hair was pulled back severely, and her expression carried an authority he didn't recognize. Beside her sat a man Anthony knew by reputation, Preston Caldwell, one of the most ruthless and expensive corporate attorneys in the state. The kind of lawyer Anthony himself couldn't afford even before this morning's financial crisis began. "Good morning," Carolyn said, her voice calm and clear. "Please sit down. We have a great deal to discuss, and I don't want to waste anyone's time." Chapter 3. The Woman They Never Knew. Anthony stood frozen in the doorway, his brain struggling to reconcile the image in front of him with his understanding of who his wife was supposed to be. This couldn't be Carolyn. His Carolyn didn't wear power suits. She didn't hire attorneys who charged $5,000 just to take a phone call. She didn't sit at the head of boardroom tables looking like she belonged there. But the woman staring back at him with those clear, cold eyes was definitely Carolyn, and she was definitely someone he had never actually known. "Please sit," she repeated, and there was something in her tone that made his legs move before his mind fully processed the command. He dropped into a chair across from her. Diane and Bernard took seats on either side of him, all three of them looking disoriented. Preston Caldwell opened his briefcase with unhurried precision, pulling out a thick folder and setting it on the table between them. When he spoke, his voice carried the casual confidence of someone who already knew he had won. "Let's establish the basic facts. Mrs. Jackson has appointed herself CEO of Heritage Grand Holdings, effective immediately. Mr. Jackson, your requests for operational control are denied. You have no authority over this hotel, its finances, or any associated business decisions." Diane slammed her hand on the table, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "This is absolutely ridiculous. Carolyn doesn't know anything about running a hotel. She's never run anything in her entire life." Carolyn's smile was thin and sharp as a blade. "I've been running 3 boutique hotels for the past 2 years. Grandmother Beatrice didn't just gift me this property. She spent 3 years training me to manage it. Every Wednesday when you thought I was having lunch with friends, I was in executive meetings learning about operations management. Every Thursday when you assumed I was shopping, I was reviewing financial statements and making staffing decisions." She slid documents across the table toward them. "These are financial records showing that Heritage Grand has been losing money under previous management. Revenue down 12% over the last year. Guest satisfaction scores declining. The restaurant operating at a significant loss. I'm here to fix these problems, not hand control over to someone who doesn't understand hospitality management." Anthony's face flushed deep red. "You've been working behind my back for 2 years?" "Behind your back?" Carolyn leaned forward, and her voice carried an edge he had never heard before. "Anthony, you never asked what I did during the day. Not once in 5 years. You never asked about my interests, my goals, my capabilities, or what I might want from my life. You just assumed I sat at home waiting for you to come back and tell me what to think." Mr. Ashford stepped forward. "I can confirm that Mrs. Jackson has been consulting here for 18 months, working directly with your grandmother to understand every aspect of hotel operations. She knows this business better than most people who've been in hospitality for 20 years. "This is betrayal," Diane said, her voice shaking with genuine emotion now. "We're family. Family doesn't deceive each other like this. Anthony, you need to file for divorce. Today, right now. We don't have to tolerate this kind of disrespect." Anthony opened his mouth to agree, but Preston spoke before he could. "You're welcome to file for divorce, Mr. Jackson. However, you should understand that we've already hired forensic accountants to review all joint finances. Every transaction, every account, every loan. The investigation has been ongoing for several months, and we've found some very interesting irregularities." Bernard Mills went absolutely still. "What kind of irregularities?" Preston pulled out another set of documents, placing them carefully in front of Anthony. "Mr. Jackson has been embezzling from his own construction company for approximately 2 years. He created a network of shell corporations designed to hide money and inflate his apparent success. Funds were transferred to accounts under his mother's name. He glanced at Diane. And then used for personal expenses while the company accumulated debt. That's not, I haven't, Anthony stammered, but the words died when Preston placed bank statements in front of him. There it was in black and white. Money flowing out of his company, deposits into accounts Diane controlled. A paper trail that suddenly looked damning when laid out with such brutal clarity. "How did you get these?" Anthony whispered. "Your wife's grandmother hired investigators 2 years ago," Preston said calmly. "She suspected financial irregularities and wanted to protect Carolyn. The investigators were remarkably thorough." Diane's voice came out strained. "These are private financial matters between a mother and son. There's nothing illegal about me helping Anthony manage his money." "Perhaps not," Preston agreed, "except for the part where that money was embezzled from his company, and except for the 17 instances where Mr. Jackson used his wife's forged signature on loan applications, using her anticipated inheritance as collateral." Bernard Mills stood abruptly, his face pale. "You forged her signature. Anthony, please tell me you didn't actually forge her signature." Anthony couldn't speak. He stared at the documents, watching his entire life collapse on a single sheet of paper. Those loans had seemed like a good idea at the time. He'd been so certain he could repay them once Carolyn inherited. The signature had been easy to duplicate. She'd never paid attention to their finances anyway. How was he supposed to know she would fight back? "The district attorney is very interested in these documents," Preston continued. "Wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, embezzlement. The charges are quite serious. We're looking at significant prison time if prosecuted." "Wait," Anthony said, his voice cracking. "Wait, Carolyn, we can work this out. I made mistakes, but we're married. We can fix this together." For the first time since they'd entered the room, Carolyn stood. She walked to the windows overlooking the city, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet, but absolutely firm. "We're not married in any meaningful sense, Anthony. We've been 2 people living in the same house, but we were never partners. You wanted a decorative wife who made you look successful while you controlled every aspect of her existence. That's not a marriage. That's ownership." She turned to face him. "My grandmother saw what was happening to me. She watched me disappear a little more each year, becoming smaller and quieter and less myself. She spent 3 years teaching me who I actually was underneath all the conditioning. She gave me tools, knowledge, connections, and the confidence to use them. And she documented every crime you committed so that when this moment came, I would be protected." "What do you want?" Diane asked, and for the first time she sounded genuinely frightened. "Money. We can work out a settlement. Anthony can sign over his interest in the house, other assets." "I don't want your assets," Carolyn said. "I want you to face consequences for what you've done. Preston, file the criminal complaints, all of them." "Carolyn, please." Anthony started to stand, but Preston's hand stopped him. "Don't address my client directly. If you have something to say it to me." Anthony looked at Bernard, who was staring at the documents with an expression of horror. "Bernard, you're my lawyer. Help me. Tell her we can fight this." Bernard closed his briefcase slowly. "I may have a conflict of interest here, Anthony. I helped you structure some of these transactions. If you use them for illegal purposes without my knowledge—" He trailed off. "I need to consult with my own attorney. I'm withdrawing from this case effective immediately." He walked out, leaving Anthony and Diane sitting alone across from Carolyn and Preston. The silence stretched, broken only by Anthony's phone continuing to vibrate with calls from creditors he didn't have answers for. Carolyn gathered her materials. "Mr. Ashford will show you out. Don't contact me again. The restraining order paperwork is already being filed." At the door, she paused and looked back at Anthony. He was slumped in his chair, his expensive suit suddenly looking too big for him, his face grey with shock. "You told me I came from nothing," Carolyn said quietly. "But you were wrong. I came from a woman who taught me that power isn't given. It's built, piece by piece, choice by choice. She built it for me while you were too busy counting my inheritance to notice what she was doing. That was your real mistake, Anthony. Not underestimating me, underestimating her." She walked out, Preston following, leaving them alone with the wreckage of everything they had planned. Outside in the hallway, Mr. Ashford waited with a tablet. "Your office is ready, Mrs. Jackson. Top floor, corner suite. The executive team is assembled and waiting to meet their new CEO." Carolyn took a deep breath. This was it, the moment where she stopped being Anthony Jackson's wife and became Carolyn Jennings, hotel executive, the woman her grandmother had spent 3 years preparing her to be. "Thank you, Mr. Ashford. Let's get to work." Chapter 4. The Emperor's New Debts. The days following the confrontation at Heritage Grand passed in a blur of phone calls, emergency meetings, and mounting panic. Anthony Jackson sat in his office, though it wouldn't be his office much longer, given that the building lease was in default, watching his business collapse in real time. His construction company had been hemorrhaging clients since the morning at Heritage Grand. First, the Riverside development project pulled out, citing concerns about financial stability. The project manager had been apologetic but firm. "Our investors did due diligence, Anthony. They found irregularities that make them uncomfortable. We're terminating the contract per the instability clause." Then Westbrook Plaza cancelled, then Harbour Square. One by one, every major project Anthony had counted on disappeared. Contracts that had seemed solid suddenly revealed termination clauses he'd forgotten about. Clients who'd been friendly last week now wouldn't return his calls. His business partner, Frank Delaney, sat across the desk with his resignation letter already signed. "I can't stay, Anthony. My reputation is tied to this company, and right now this company is toxic. People are asking me if I knew about the embezzlement, if I was involved in the fraud. I have to distance myself before I go down with you." "I never meant for this to happen," Anthony said, and he was surprised to find he actually meant it. Somewhere along the way, the small compromises had become big ones. The loans he planned to repay became loans he couldn't repay. The shortcuts became fraud. It just got out of control. Frank's expression held pity mixed with contempt. "You forged your wife's signature, Anthony. That's not something that gets out of control. That's something you chose to do." After Frank left, Anthony sat alone in the silent office. Most of his staff had been laid off. The ones who remained were busy updating their resumes. Even his assistant had stopped coming in. He thought about calling Carolyn, begging her to drop the charges, offering to do whatever she wanted. But he remembered the look in her eyes at Heritage Grand, the absolute lack of doubt or hesitation. She had already moved on. He was just a problem she was systematically solving. At the Jackson family home, Diane paced frantically. Her carefully maintained world was disintegrating. Friends who used to invite her to charity galas suddenly had scheduling conflicts. Her membership at the country club was being reviewed. Her own lawyer had advised her that she was potentially criminally liable for receiving embezzled funds. "We have to fight back," she told Anthony when he finally came home that evening. "We can't just let her destroy us like this." "With what?" Anthony's voice was flat, defeated. "We don't have money for a legal defense. Every attorney I've called wants retainers we can't afford. The ones who might work with us won't touch the case once they hear Carolyn has Preston Caldwell." Diane stopped pacing. When she spoke, her voice carried a calculating edge he recognized from childhood. His mother in problem-solving mode, willing to do whatever was necessary. "Then we need something that doesn't cost money, something that destroys her credibility rather than fighting her in court. If we can make her look bad, unstable, or compromised, it might give us leverage." "Like what?" "I'll figure something out. But first, we need information." She pulled out her phone. "I'm hiring a private investigator, someone who can follow her, document her activities, find anything we can use. We can barely afford rent, and you want to hire an investigator. I'll get the money." Diane's jaw set stubbornly. "I still have my mother's jewelry. Some of it's worth considerable amounts. This is about survival, Anthony. Sometimes you have to make sacrifices." The investigator she found was Mitchell Cross, a former police detective who now worked private cases out of a strip mall office. He had a thick mustache, tired eyes, and the look of someone who'd seen everything twice and no longer judged any of it. "I need you to follow someone," Diane said, sliding a photo of Carolyn across his desk. "Document everything, where she goes, who she meets, anything that might be useful." Mitchell examined the photo. "What exactly are we looking for?" "Anything that makes her look bad. Affairs, improper business dealings, substance use. I don't care what it is as long as it gives us leverage." Mitchell's expression didn't change. "I document what I see. What you do with that information is your business. My rate is $200 an hour plus expenses." Diane wrote him a check she couldn't really afford, drawn on an account that might be frozen soon. "Start immediately." Mitchell followed Carolyn for a week. It was boring work. She went to Heritage Grand every morning, held meetings, reviewed operations, and made business decisions. She had lunch with lawyers and accountants. She visited her other properties. She was professional, focused, and frustratingly clean. No affairs, no hidden addictions, no scandalous behavior whatsoever. But then Mitchell noticed something interesting. She was meeting regularly with a man Mitchell identified as Julian Reeves, owner of Reeves Capital Group. They'd had dinner 4 times in the past 2 weeks, always nice restaurants, always long conversations that extended well past normal business meeting duration. Mitchell took photos and delivered them to Diane with his report. "She's clean on everything else. But this guy, they're meeting a lot. Could be business, could be personal, hard to tell from the outside." Diane studied the photos. Julian Reeves was handsome, successful, wealthy, everything Anthony wasn't anymore. The images showed Carolyn and Julian at an outdoor cafe, leaning close in conversation. At another restaurant, laughing at something he'd said. Outside Heritage Grand, standing together looking at building plans. "Can you make it look like more than business?" Diane asked. Mitchell lit a cigarette despite his own no-smoking sign. "I take pictures. How people interpret those pictures isn't my concern." "Then take more pictures," Diane said, "and make sure they're suggestive." While Diane plotted, Carolyn was completely aware she was being followed. She'd noticed Mitchell 3 days into his surveillance. He was decent at his job, but she'd been taught by professionals how to spot surveillance. Her grandmother's paranoia about Anthony had extended to teaching Carolyn basic security awareness. She sat in Julian Reeves' office, 40 floors above the city, discussing the surveillance with amusement rather than concern. "They hired Mitchell Cross to follow me," she told Julian, accepting the tea he poured from a silver service. "He's not particularly subtle. I spotted him within days." Julian sat across from her, his expression thoughtful. He was in his mid-40s, with distinguished silver-streaked hair and the kind of calm presence that came from genuine confidence rather than performance. "Does it worry you? Should it?" Carolyn sipped her tea. "Everything we're doing is completely legitimate business. If they try to spin it into something else, Preston will destroy them. Again." "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman." Julian set down his cup carefully. "When she first contacted me about potentially working with you, I'll admit I was skeptical. I'd seen too many people inherit wealth and have no idea what to do with it. But you came to our first meeting with business plans, financial projections, and realistic timelines. You weren't just inheriting a hotel, you were building an empire." That was her doing. She spent 3 years teaching me everything she knew, making me read annual reports until I could spot manipulation in financial statements, putting me in management positions where I had to make real decisions with real consequences. She was preparing me for this moment. "For this moment," Carolyn agreed. She knew Anthony would try to take everything. She knew I'd have to fight. She wanted to make sure I'd win. They discussed details of a potential partnership, Julian's investment firm providing capital for Carolyn's expansion plans. 3 more properties over the next 2 years, each one blending luxury hospitality with community service. It was an unusual model, but Julian understood what Carolyn was trying to create. "My grandmother believed wealth was a responsibility, not just a privilege," Carolyn explained. She spent her life building businesses that employed people, supported communities, and created opportunities. I want to honor that philosophy while proving it's also good business. Then we'll make it happen. Julian raised his teacup in a small toast. To building something that matters. Outside in a parked car, Mitchell Cross captured photos through a telephoto lens. The images showed Carolyn and Julian talking, sharing tea, laughing together. Innocent moments that, with careful cropping and selective context, could be made to look like something more intimate. That evening, Anthony reviewed the photos Mitchell had delivered. His lawyer was gone. His business was dead. His marriage was over. But maybe, just maybe, he could damage Carolyn's reputation enough to gain some leverage. If people believed she was having an affair, it might undermine her credibility, make investors question her judgment, give him some small measure of revenge for what she'd done to him. Send these to business networks, he told Diane. Every contact we still have. Make sure people see them. Diane hesitated. This is a dangerous move, Anthony. If it backfires, it can't get worse than it already is. Do it. That night, they leaked the photos across business networks with carefully worded suggestions about Carolyn's close relationship with Julian Reeves. By morning, the images were circulating through industry circles, generating gossip and speculation. Anthony waited for the fallout, imagining Carolyn's humiliation, her carefully built credibility damaged. But he had forgotten something crucial. Carolyn wasn't alone anymore. She had Preston Caldwell, who didn't just defend his clients. He destroyed their enemies with surgical precision. The counterattack came within hours, and it was devastating. Chapter 5. The Architect of Their Ruin. Preston Caldwell's response to the leaked photos was a masterclass in controlled destruction. Within 4 hours of the images appearing in business networks, he had assembled a complete counter-narrative backed by irrefutable evidence. First came the unedited photographs, released to the same networks where Anthony's cropped versions had circulated. The full images showed restaurant settings with business documents visible on tables, other colleagues present in some shots, and the unmistakable context of professional meetings rather than romantic encounters. Then came time-stamped security footage from 3 different restaurants showing Carolyn and Julian's meetings in their full context, arriving separately, discussing documents throughout dinner, departing separately. In one video, Julian's daughter Claire joined them for part of the conversation, discussing architecture and community development. Finally, Preston released audio recordings of several business discussions between Carolyn and Julian, legally obtained with both parties' consent. The recordings made clear they were discussing investment strategies, property development, and philanthropic goals. Nothing personal, nothing inappropriate. Preston didn't just release the evidence, he held a press conference. Mr. Anthony Jackson and Mrs. Diane Jackson have attempted to smear my client's professional reputation by implying an inappropriate relationship with her business partner, Mr. Julian Reeves, Preston stated to assembled media. This is false, defamatory, and represents a new low in their ongoing harassment campaign. All meetings between Mrs. Jennings and Mr. Reeves were professional in nature and conducted in public settings. We have extensive documentation proving this. He paused, letting that sink in. Mr. Jackson is currently under investigation for embezzlement, wire fraud, and identity theft. These false allegations against my client appear to be a desperate attempt to deflect from his own criminal behavior. We're now considering legal action against both Mr. Jackson and Mrs. Diane Jackson for defamation, harassment, and witness intimidation. The effect was immediate and brutal. Business networks that had been whispering about Carolyn's alleged affair immediately shifted to condemning Anthony's smear campaign. The narrative flipped from questionable relationship to desperate criminal trying to destroy his victim's reputation. Headlines appeared within hours. Husband attempts. Character assassination after wife discovers his fraud. Industry publications ran sympathetic profiles of Carolyn, framing her as a businesswoman fighting back against an abusive marriage. Anthony watched it unfold from his nearly empty office, feeling like he was drowning. Every move he made somehow made things worse. Every attempt to fight back resulted in more evidence of his crimes being revealed. Carolyn wasn't just beating him, she was systematically dismantling his entire existence. His phone rang. It was one of his last remaining clients calling to terminate their final contract. "I'm sorry, Anthony. I can't be associated with someone who would stoop to manufacturing fake affairs. It's beneath everything our company stands for." After the call ended, Anthony sat in silence. Frank had been right. This wasn't something that got out of control. This was consequences for choices he'd made, decisions he'd rationalized, lies he'd told himself about who he was and what he was doing. But while Anthony contemplated the ruins of his life, Preston and his forensic accountants were uncovering something even more damning. The embezzlement was worse than initial estimates. Anthony hadn't just stolen $2 million. He'd created an entire network of fraudulent activity, shell corporations that existed only on paper, fake construction projects that generated invoices but no actual work, a web of lies so complicated that even Anthony himself probably couldn't untangle it anymore. And then there were the forged signatures. 17 loan applications bearing Carolyn's signature. Banks had loaned Anthony money, significant amounts, believing that Carolyn's anticipated inheritance secured the debt. When those loans came due and Anthony couldn't pay, the banks would have gone after Carolyn if not for Preston's intervention, proving the signatures were forgeries. Preston met with the district attorney personally, laying out the evidence in exhaustive detail. The DA was a sharp woman named Rachel Morrison, who had built her career prosecuting white-collar crime. "This is extensive," she said, reviewing page after page of documentation. "Wire fraud, bank fraud, embezzlement, forgery, identity theft. Mr. Jackson is looking at serious federal time." "My client wants full prosecution," Preston said. "She was victimized by this man for years. He stole her identity to commit crimes, then tried to destroy her reputation when she fought back." Rachel nodded slowly. "What about the mother, Diane Jackson?" "She received substantial amounts of embezzled money. She had to know where it was coming from. At minimum, she's guilty of receiving stolen property, potentially conspiracy if we can prove she helped him plan it." "I'll convene a grand jury," Rachel decided. "This case is strong enough to take to trial." While prosecutors built their case, Carolyn focused on Heritage Grand. The hotel had been neglected under previous management, and she attacked the problems with methodical precision. She fired 3 managers who'd been stealing supplies and taking kickbacks from vendors. She renegotiated contracts, cutting costs while improving service quality. She implemented new training programs that transformed staff from indifferent employees into engaged professionals who took pride in their work. The restaurant underwent a complete overhaul. She brought in a new executive chef whose reputation attracted food critics and serious diners. Within weeks, the restaurant went from losing money to requiring reservations 2 weeks in advance. Guest satisfaction scores climbed dramatically. Online reviews shifted from mixed to overwhelmingly positive. Revenue increased month over month, first 20%, then 35%, then 42%. The business community noticed. Hospitality publications ran features about the remarkable transformation at Heritage Grand. Carolyn gave interviews, explaining her philosophy of combining excellent service with social responsibility. "We're converting the 10th floor into affordable housing for our staff," she told one journalist. "Hospitality workers often struggle with housing costs in expensive cities. By providing quality apartments at below-market rates, we reduce turnover, build loyalty, and demonstrate that profitable businesses can also serve their communities. It's not charity, it's smart management." Julian Reeves attended the hotel's reopening gala several months after the initial confrontation. The event was elegant but purposeful, celebrating not just the hotel's improvements, but its commitment to being a community anchor. Carolyn gave a speech about integrity, vision, and the responsibility of wealth. She wore a midnight blue dress and spoke without notes, her confidence absolute. Julian found her afterward on the terrace, taking a brief respite from the crowd. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said quietly. Carolyn smiled, and it was genuine. "This is just the foundation. I have plans for 12 more properties over the next 5 years, each one following the same model: luxury, service funding, community benefits." "I don't doubt you'll succeed." Julian looked at her with something approaching admiration. "You've changed since we first met. There's a certainty in you now that wasn't there before." "I'm not performing anymore. For years, I was performing the role of Anthony's wife, trying to be what he wanted, what Diane expected, what I thought I needed to be to deserve basic respect. Now I'm just being who I actually am." "And who is that?" Carolyn thought about the question seriously. Someone who builds things. Someone who creates value not just for herself, but for communities. Someone who understands that power isn't about control, it's about creation and responsibility. Across town, Anthony Jackson met with a public defender in a courthouse conference room. His private attorney had withdrawn from the case. He couldn't afford new representation. The public defender looked young and overwhelmed. "The evidence against you is substantial, Mr. Jackson," the lawyer said, his voice apologetic. "The district attorney has 17 counts of fraud, 8 counts of embezzlement, multiple counts of forgery and identity theft. If convicted on all counts, you're looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison." 20 years. Anthony felt the number like a physical blow. He would be in his 60s when he got out. His business would be long gone. His reputation destroyed forever. His entire life erased. "What are my options?" "Plead guilty and cooperate with prosecutors. Hope for a reduced sentence. If you go to trial and lose, which you probably will given the evidence, judges tend to impose harsher sentences." Anthony put his head in his hands. He thought about the moment this had all started, the day he'd decided that taking a little money from his company's accounts wasn't really stealing, that using Carolyn's signature was just convenient, that lying about his success was necessary to maintain his image, small compromises that became big ones, shortcuts that became crimes, a life built on lies that was now collapsing under the weight of truth. "How did I get here?" he asked, not really expecting an answer. The public defender didn't have one to give. They both knew exactly how Anthony had gotten here, through choices he'd made, lies he'd told, and underestimating the woman he'd spent 5 years controlling. At Heritage Grand, the gala continued past midnight. Carolyn danced with guests, accepted congratulations, and made plans for the future. Julian stayed near her, not possessive but present, and she found herself grateful for his steady support. When the last guest finally departed, Carolyn stood in the lobby of her hotel and felt something she hadn't experienced in years: peace. She had won. Not through luck or accident, but through preparation, intelligence, and the foundation her grandmother had spent years helping her build. She had taken everything Anthony tried to steal and created something meaningful with it. The empire was hers, the victory was hers, the future was hers, and she was only getting started. Chapter 6. The last desperate move. Anthony Jackson couldn't sleep anymore. He lay in the cheap apartment he'd rented after losing the house, staring at water stains on the ceiling and listening to sirens wail through the night. The preliminary hearing for his criminal trial was in 3 weeks. His public defender had been honest about the odds: 90% chance of conviction, probable sentence between 15 and 20 years. He was 47 years old. He'd be nearly 70 when he got out of prison, if he survived that long. Diane arrived after midnight, using the key he'd reluctantly given her. She looked exhausted, older somehow, her careful grooming replaced by visible defeat. Her house was in foreclosure, her social circle had evaporated. She was facing her own criminal charges for receiving stolen money. "I've been thinking," she said, sitting on his sagging couch. "There might be one more option." "There are no more options." Anthony's voice was flat. "Preston has documented everything. The DA wants to make an example of me. It's over." "It's not over until you're behind bars." Diane leaned forward, and Anthony recognized that expression, his mother in survival mode, willing to consider things she normally wouldn't. "We need to change the narrative." If we can get an expert to testify that Carolyn's behavior suggests psychological instability, we might create reasonable doubt about her testimony. Anthony sat up slowly. That's witness tampering. We're already facing fraud charges. We're already facing 15 to 20 years. What exactly do we have to lose? Diane's voice cracked. I still have one asset left, my mother's house in Florida. I can mortgage it, get enough money to pay for expert testimony. The thoughts weren't rational, but desperation rarely is. Do it, he said finally. 3 days later, they sat across from Dr. Lawrence Hunt, a former psychiatrist who'd surrendered his license rather than face ethics hearings in 2 states. He looked at the $30,000 Diane offered and nodded slowly. You understand the risk, Hunt said carefully. We just need you to review the case and testify about possible emotional instability affecting testimony reliability, Diane insisted. Her behavior has been erratic. The sudden transformation, the vindictive actions, it's enough to create doubt. But they had forgotten something crucial. Preston Caldwell had been monitoring their communications since the fraud investigation began, legally, with proper court authorization. Preston received transcripts of their conversations with Dr. Hunt within 24 hours. He called the district attorney immediately. Rachel Morrison listened to the recordings, her expression darkening. Witness tampering in a federal fraud case. They're done. We arrest all 3 before they can proceed, Preston said. Document the full conspiracy, then shut it down. The arrests happened simultaneously at dawn. Federal agents took Anthony and Diane from their apartments while local police arrested Dr. Hunt at his office. None of them had expected authorities to move so quickly. By afternoon, additional charges had been filed: witness tampering, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit perjury, each carrying significant prison time, each to be served consecutively with the fraud sentences. Anthony's public defender visited that evening looking exhausted. Mr. Jackson, you need to accept the plea deal immediately. Plead guilty to all charges, cooperate fully, and they'll recommend 18 years instead of 40 plus. It's the only option you have left. Anthony put his head in his hands. He had tried everything: lies, theft, manipulation, conspiracy, and failed at every turn. There was nothing left but surrender. I'll take the deal, he said quietly. Diane accepted a similar arrangement. 12 years for receiving stolen funds, conspiracy and witness tampering. Dr. Hunt received 5 years. Preston met with Carolyn in her office at Heritage Grand to explain what had happened, keeping details minimal. Anthony and Diane attempted one final scheme to undermine the case, he said. They tried to hire someone to provide false testimony. It failed spectacularly. They've both accepted plea deals. Anthony gets 18 years, Diane gets 12. It's over, Carolyn. Completely over. Carolyn looked out the window at the city below. What kind of testimony were they planning? Preston hesitated, then decided she deserved the truth. They were going to claim you weren't mentally competent to testify reliably, that your transformation was evidence of psychological instability. Carolyn felt ice flood her veins, but her voice remained steady. They tried to have me declared insane. They tried and failed catastrophically. The attempt added years to their sentences. But Carolyn, their failure proves how desperate and groundless their position was. They had nothing. No legitimate defense, no real evidence, only desperate lies that collapsed immediately. She turned to face him. I spent 5 years being told I was incompetent and unreliable. They wanted to make that official, to have it declared in court. But it didn't happen. It never will. You've built something real that no lies can destroy. Carolyn took a deep breath, letting the rage flow through her and past her. You're right. They failed. I won. That's enough. That evening she told Julian what had happened. They sat on his apartment balcony watching city lights reflect off the river. How do you feel? He asked carefully. Exhausted, she admitted. I thought I'd won months ago. But they kept escalating. The smear campaign with our photos, now this attack on my sanity. When does it actually end? Now, Julian said firmly. They're going to prison. They have nothing left. It ends now. I hope you're right. She leaned against him. I just want to build things, create something meaningful. I'm so tired of looking backward. Then stop looking backward, Julian said simply. They're done. You won. Now live like someone who won. Over the following weeks, Anthony's company declared bankruptcy. Federal prosecutors closed their investigation. The cases were finalized. Anthony and Diane began serving their sentences, and Carolyn finally allowed herself to stop waiting for the next attack. The war was over. Chapter 7. The Woman Who Learned to Trust. 6 months after the final sentencing, Carolyn stood in Heritage Grand's executive office reviewing expansion plans. The hotel was thriving, revenue up 35%, guest satisfaction at record highs, affordable housing fully occupied with a 200-family waiting list. Everything was working exactly as planned. Her relationship with Julian had deepened naturally over those months. Dinners that lasted until midnight, weekends spent together exploring the city or staying in, reading on his couch while he worked on investment analyses, conversations that ranged from business strategy to childhood memories to plans for the future. He'd introduced her to his daughter Claire, who came home from graduate school for Thanksgiving. The three of them had cooked together in Julian's loft. Too much wine, burned vegetables, laughter over failed recipes. It felt like family, in a way Carolyn had never experienced in her marriage to Anthony. Dad's different since he met you, Claire told Carolyn while Julian was in another room, lighter somehow, actually living instead of just working. He's helped me more than you know, Carolyn replied, showed me what real partnership looks like. One evening in early December, Julian asked her to move in with him. They were on his balcony, wrapped in a blanket against the cold, watching snow begin to fall over the city. Move in with me, he said. Not because it makes business sense or because we're supposed to, because I love you and I want to build a life with you, a real life where we're partners in everything. Carolyn felt tears she didn't try to hide. Yes. Moving her belongings took a weekend. Claire helped, teasing them both about their respective collections of business books and art catalogues. The loft had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, exposed brick walls that Carolyn loved, and enough space for both their lives to fit comfortably. Her furniture mixed with Julian's, and it felt right in a way her marriage to Anthony never had. This wasn't about one person dominating the space, it was about creating something new together. But 3 weeks after moving in, cracks began to show. It started small. Julian worked late several nights in a row, missing dinners they'd planned. When Carolyn asked about it, he was vague. Just a complicated deal, nothing to worry about. Then she noticed he'd taken several phone calls in another room, his voice low and tense in ways she couldn't quite hear. When she walked in once, he'd ended the call abruptly. I'll call you back. Who was that? Carolyn asked, trying to keep her tone light. Just business, nothing important. But his expression suggested otherwise. The old fear crept in, the fear from her marriage to Anthony, where secrets always meant betrayal, where evasiveness always hid something terrible. She tried to push it down, reminding herself that Julian wasn't Anthony, that not every secret was malicious. But the feeling persisted. One evening she found a folder on his desk labeled Hartley Properties. She recognized the name, a struggling hotel chain that had approached her months ago about a buyout. She'd declined, not interested in acquiring failing properties. Inside the folder were financial analyses, property valuations, and, most troublingly, emails between Julian and Marcus Hartley discussing potential acquisition terms. Carolyn's hand shook as she read. Julian was planning to buy Hartley Properties, without telling her. After she'd explicitly said she wasn't interested. When he came home that night, she was sitting in the living room with the folder on her lap. Julian saw it and stopped. Carolyn, you're buying Hartley Properties. Her voice was steady, but her heart was racing. Behind my back. After I told you I wasn't interested. It's not behind your back. I was going to tell you. When? After you'd already closed the deal? She stood, and years of buried fear came flooding back. This is what Anthony did. Made decisions about my life without telling me. Controlled things I should have known about. I thought you were different. Julian's expression shifted to something she'd rarely seen, hurt mixed with frustration. I am different. This has nothing to do with controlling you. I'm buying Hartley properties for my investment firm, not for you. It's completely separate from your business. But you hid it from me. I didn't hide it. I was waiting for the right time to discuss it because I knew you'd rejected Hartley's buyout offer, and I didn't want you to think I was going behind your back. His voice rose slightly, then he took a breath, forcing himself calm. Carolyn, I have my own business, my own deals. I don't need your permission for every investment decision I make. The words hit like cold water. He was right. She'd been so damaged by Anthony that she'd started seeing betrayal where there was only normal business practice. I'm sorry, she said quietly. You're right. I'm seeing things that aren't there. But Julian shook his head. No, you're not entirely wrong. I should have mentioned it earlier, even if it was a separate deal. I knew Hartley had approached you. I should have been transparent about my interest in the properties. That's on me. They stood in awkward silence, both of them recognizing that this was their first real conflict and that how they handled it mattered. I'm terrified, Carolyn admitted finally. Terrified that I'll wake up one day and discover you've been lying to me all along, that everything good between us was just another illusion like my marriage was. Julian crossed the room and took her hands. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes or that we'll never have conflicts, but I can promise I'll never deliberately deceive you. And when I do mess up, like not telling you about Hartley sooner, I'll own it. That's what partnership means. How do I learn to trust that? After everything Anthony did. The same way I learned to trust again after Amanda died, Julian said gently. Not all at once, not perfectly, but by paying attention to actions over time and being willing to give people chances to prove themselves. Carolyn leaned into him, feeling the fear slowly recede. Tell me about the Hartley deal. They sat together while Julian explained his analysis of the properties, his plans for restructuring them, why he thought they represented good investments, even though they weren't right for Carolyn's model. She listened, asking questions, gradually understanding that this was genuinely separate from her business. I'm not trying to compete with you, Julian said. I'm not trying to build my own version of what you've created. These are traditional investment properties. Buy low, restructure, improve operations, eventually sell at profit. That's different from your long-term community-focused model. I understand that now. I'm sorry I jumped to conclusions. And I'm sorry I wasn't more transparent up front. They ordered takeout and ate dinner sitting on the floor, talking through their different business philosophies and how they could maintain separate professional identities while building a shared personal life. It was hard, occasionally uncomfortable, but ultimately strengthening. I don't want to lose myself again, Carolyn said as they were cleaning up. I spent 5 years disappearing inside my marriage. I can't do that again, even with someone I love. Then don't, Julian said simply. Keep your business, keep your identity, keep everything that makes you who you are. I fell in love with Carolyn Jennings, successful hotel executive and brilliant businesswoman. I don't want you to be anyone else. That conversation became a foundation. Over the following weeks, they established clearer boundaries, separate business interests, transparent communication about deals that might intersect, mutual respect for independent decision-making. It wasn't perfect. They had disagreements about how much time to spend together versus on work. They had to navigate how to combine lives without losing individual identities. But they approached each challenge as partners, talking through problems instead of hiding them. One evening in late January, nearly a year after grandmother Beatrice's death, Carolyn visited her grave alone. She arranged white roses, Beatrice's favorite, and sat on the cold ground, talking to the woman who'd saved her life. I'm learning to trust again, she said quietly. It's harder than rebuilding the hotel. harder than fighting Anthony, because it requires me to be vulnerable in ways I'd forgotten how to be. The wind rustled through bare tree branches overhead. Carolyn imagined her grandmother's voice responding, "Being vulnerable isn't weakness, it's courage. The real victory isn't protecting yourself from ever being hurt again, it's choosing to open yourself to possibility despite the risk." "I miss you," Carolyn said. "Every day. But I think I'm finally becoming who you always believed I could be. Not just strong enough to fight, but strong enough to love again, to build again, to trust again." She stayed until sunset, then drove to the loft where Julian was making dinner and Claire had stopped by unexpectedly. The apartment smelled like garlic and tomatoes, and music played softly from speakers. "There you are," Claire called from the kitchen. "Dad's attempting his famous pasta recipe, which means we'll probably order pizza in an hour." "I heard that," Julian protested, but he was smiling. Carolyn stood in the doorway watching them, this makeshift family she was building with people who chose to be in her life rather than people she was trapped with. It wasn't perfect, it was complicated and occasionally difficult, but it was real, and that made it worth every risk. Chapter 8. The Reconstruction. Heritage. Grand's expansion broke ground in early spring. Carolyn stood at the construction site wearing a hard hat, reviewing architectural plans with the lead contractor. Julian was there representing his investment firm's stake in the project, their first formal business collaboration after establishing clear professional boundaries. "The adjacent property purchase closed last week," the lead architect explained. "We're proposing a 10-story addition that connects to the existing building at the 3rd and 7th floors. 6 floors of additional hotel rooms, 3 floors of affordable housing, and ground-level community space." Carolyn studied the designs carefully. Her grandmother had taught her to read architectural plans like novels, understanding not just what was shown, but what was possible and what was missing. "The community space needs to be larger," she said, marking the drawings. "Double this footprint and add commercial kitchen facilities. I want to partner with the culinary school downtown, give their students real-world experience while serving the neighborhood." "That will increase costs significantly," one of the architects cautioned. "I understand. But we're not building just a hotel. We're building infrastructure for an entire community." Julian listened without interrupting, recognizing this as Carolyn's project, even though his firm had invested capital. They'd established clear roles. She maintained creative and operational control. He provided financial backing and strategic advice when asked. It was a balance that respected both their expertise and their independence. The meeting stretched through the afternoon as they worked through materials, timelines, and integration with existing systems. When everyone finally left, Carolyn stood at the construction site fence, looking at where the expansion would rise. Julian came to stand beside her. "You're thinking about something. My grandmother used to say every building tells a story about the person who commissioned it. What story does this expansion tell?" "That you believe businesses can serve multiple purposes, that profit and social good aren't mutually exclusive." "Is that too idealistic? Am I building something that only works because I'm willing to accept lower margins?" "You're building something that works because you've proven the model is sustainable," Julian said firmly. "Your occupancy rates exceed comparable properties. Your staff retention is exceptional. Your brand attracts guests specifically because of your values. That's not idealism. That's smart business that happens to also do good." Over the following months, construction progressed steadily. Carolyn was on site regularly, meeting with contractors and reviewing quality control. She'd learned from her grandmother to understand every aspect of what she built, but one afternoon in June, she got a call that stopped her cold. "Mrs. Jennings, this is Maria Santos." The voice was strained, upset. "I need to talk to you about the housing program." Maria was one of the affordable housing residents, a housekeeper whose daughter had gone from sleeping in their car to making honor roll because of the stability the program provided. Carolyn's heart sank. "What's wrong?" Some of the other residents are saying management is planning to convert our floors back to regular hotel rooms. That the program was just temporary. Is that true? Absolutely not. Where did you hear that? Someone put flyers under our doors. They said once the expansion is complete, we'll all be evicted so the hotel can make more money from regular guests. Carolyn felt rage build in her chest. Maria, I promise you, that's completely false. The affordable housing program is permanent. Nobody is being evicted. Can you bring me one of those flyers? An hour later, Maria arrived at Carolyn's office with the flyer. It was professionally printed, designed to look like an official hotel communication, warning residents their leases would terminate in 60 days. Who would do this? Maria asked, her voice breaking. We finally have stability. My daughter is thriving. The thought of going back to sleeping in my car... You're not going anywhere, Carolyn said firmly. This is a malicious lie, and I'm going to find out who's behind it. Preston Caldwell reviewed the flyer in his office that evening. This is targeted harassment, possibly criminal, depending on who's behind it. Could it be Anthony? Even from prison? Unlikely. He has no resources and no outside contacts willing to help him. This feels like something else. The answer came 2 days later, when Preston's investigators identified the source. Marcus Hartley, the struggling hotel owner whose properties Julian was in the process of acquiring. Hartley was furious about Julian's buyout terms, which included removing Hartley from management entirely. In retaliation, he targeted Carolyn's housing program, hoping to damage her reputation and undermine Julian's investment judgment. He thought if he could make your social programs look unstable, it would reflect badly on Julian's decision-making, Preston explained. He's trying to torpedo the acquisition by destroying your credibility. Carolyn felt cold fury settle over her. He's using vulnerable people as weapons in a business dispute. Yes, and he's about to learn that was a catastrophic mistake. Preston moved swiftly. Within 48 hours, he'd filed multiple lawsuits against Hartley: harassment, defamation, fraud, and tortious interference with business relations. He also contacted every investor in Hartley Properties, providing evidence of Hartley's harassment campaign. The investors were horrified. Several immediately moved to remove Hartley from the company entirely. Julian's acquisition accelerated, with Hartley forced to accept even less favorable terms or face complete financial ruin. But more importantly, Carolyn held a mandatory meeting for all affordable housing residents. She stood in the community room, facing frightened families who'd believed they were about to lose their homes. I want to be absolutely clear, she said, her voice carrying authority and compassion. The housing program is permanent. You're not being evicted. Your leases are secure. The flyers you received were illegal harassment from someone trying to hurt me and this hotel. That person is now facing serious legal consequences. She paused, looking at faces slowly shifting from fear to relief. I built this program because I believe everyone deserves stable housing, because I believe successful businesses have obligations to the communities they serve. Those beliefs don't change because someone tries to scare you. If anything, this attack makes me more committed to proving this model works. Maria stood from the back of the room. What can we do to help? Keep living your lives. Keep working hard. Keep succeeding. That's the best response to people who want this program to fail. Prove them wrong just by thriving. After the meeting, Carolyn walked through Heritage Grand, feeling exhausted but resolved. Julian found her in the lobby, having driven straight from his office after hearing about Hartley's harassment campaign. Are you okay? He asked. I'm furious. He tried to use vulnerable families as leverage in a business dispute. He tried to destroy their sense of security just to hurt you and me. Preston says he's finished. The lawsuits, the investor revolt, Hartley will be lucky to avoid criminal charges. Good. Carolyn's voice was cold. I'm tired of men who think other people are just tools to be used and discarded. Anthony did it to me for years. Hartley just tried to do it to my residents. I'm done letting people like that operate without consequences. Julian pulled her close. You protected them. You stopped it before any real harm was done. But they were scared. Maria's daughter was crying, thinking they'd have to go back to living in their car. That fear has consequences even after the threat is gone. So, you'll help them heal from it, the same way you healed from what Anthony did, by showing them they're safe, their housing is secure, and someone will fight for them when they're threatened. Over the following weeks, Carolyn increased her presence in the affordable housing floors. She held regular meetings, answered every concern, and made herself available whenever residents needed reassurance. The fear gradually faded, replaced by renewed trust. The expansion construction continued through summer and into fall. The new floors took shape, additional hotel rooms, expanded affordable housing, the commercial kitchen that would partner with the culinary school. On a cool October afternoon, Carolyn stood in the completed commercial kitchen with Julian, imagining culinary students learning their craft while also serving neighborhood meals. "This is what I wanted to build," she said. "Not just buildings, but systems that create opportunity, places where people can grow and become more than they were." Julian looked at her with open admiration. "Your grandmother would be proud of what you've built. She gave me the tools, but I'm starting to accept that I did the building. I made the choices, took the risks, created something entirely my own, and survived attacks that would have destroyed most people," Julian added. "Anthony's fraud, his mother's conspiracies, Hartley's harassment. You've faced it all and kept building." Carolyn turned to face him fully. "I survived because I had people who supported me without controlling me. Preston, who protected me legally. Mr. Ashford, who believed in my vision. You, who loved me while letting me stay myself. That's the real difference between now and my marriage. I'm not alone anymore, but I'm also not trapped." "That's partnership," Julian said simply. "That's what it's supposed to look like." The expansion opened in November, 18 months after groundbreaking. Instead of a gala, Carolyn held a quiet celebration, residents moving into new apartments, culinary students beginning their partnership program, neighborhood families welcomed into community spaces. She walked through the completed building with Julian, examining everything from the commercial kitchen equipment to the affordable housing units to the connection bridges linking old and new structures. "It's beautiful," Julian said. "More than that, it's coherent. Every piece serves a clear purpose while contributing to the whole." Carolyn stood in the community kitchen, imagining students and neighbors filling the space with learning and creation. "This is just the foundation. I have plans for 4 more properties over the next 3 years." "Then let's build them," Julian said, "together." That evening, back at the loft they now fully shared, Carolyn stood at the window overlooking the river. Julian came to stand beside her, and they watched city lights reflect off dark water. "A year ago I was still fighting Anthony," Carolyn said quietly, "still consumed by survival and justice and proving I could win. Now I'm just building, creating things that matter, living without constantly looking over my shoulder." "That's the real victory," Julian said, "not destroying them, but becoming someone they could never touch or understand or diminish." "It's not victory at all," Carolyn corrected gently. "It's freedom. There's a difference." She thought about Anthony sometimes, serving his sentence in a federal facility, his entire life reduced to what he'd destroyed. She felt nothing when she thought of him. No anger, no satisfaction, no connection. He was simply someone who existed in her past, irrelevant to her present or future. "What are you thinking?" Julian asked. "That I'm happy. Finally, actually, genuinely happy. Not because I won or because they lost, but because I built something real, something mine, something meaningful." She turned to face him. "And because I learned to trust again, to let someone in without losing myself. That might be the hardest thing I've ever done." Julian kissed her softly. "Thank you for taking that risk, for trusting me even when it terrified you." They stood together as night deepened over the city, 2 people who'd both survived loss and found each other in the aftermath. The empire was growing, the vision was expanding, the future was full of possibility, and Carolyn Jennings was finally, completely living the life she was always meant to live. Chapter 9. The Foundation. The following spring brought a decision that would define Carolyn's legacy beyond the hotels she built. She sat in her office at Heritage Grand reviewing financial statements, calculating exactly how much wealth she'd accumulated through the successful expansion and operation of her properties. The number was substantial, far more than she'd ever need personally. Preston arrived for their quarterly meeting, and Carolyn slid a document across the desk to him. "I want to establish a foundation," she said, "endowed with 40% of my personal wealth." Preston's eyebrows rose. "That's a significant commitment." "I've been thinking about my grandmother. She didn't just give me money. She gave me tools, education, connections, and belief in myself. I want to do that for others. Women escaping controlling relationships, people who've been told they're nothing and need someone to show them they're capable of everything." What would the foundation do specifically? Carolyn pulled out a folder she'd been working on for weeks. "Business education, mentorship, and seed funding. We'll run a program that teaches financial literacy, business planning, and negotiation skills. We'll pair participants with mentors from industries they want to enter, and we'll provide startup capital for women who've completed the program and developed viable business plans." "That's ambitious," Preston said, but he was smiling. "Also expensive. I have the money, and more importantly, I have the knowledge of what women in my situation actually need, not charity, not pity, tools and opportunity, and someone who believes in them until they can believe in themselves." Over the following months, the Beatrice Jennings Foundation took shape. Carolyn assembled a board of directors, Preston for legal expertise, Mr. Ashford for operational management, Julian for investment strategy, and 3 successful women entrepreneurs who'd built their own businesses from nothing. The first cohort of 20 women entered the program in September. Carolyn insisted on interviewing each one personally, wanting to understand their stories and ensure the program served people who truly needed it. Maria Santos from Heritage Grand's Affordable Housing was among the first participants. "I want to open a catering business," she told Carolyn. "I've been cooking for my family for 20 years. Friends always say I should sell my food, but I don't know anything about running a business." "That's what we'll teach you," Carolyn said. "By the time you finish this program, you'll know how to write a business plan, manage finances, market your services, and handle the legal requirements of starting a business." Another participant was Linda Chen, who'd recently left an abusive marriage with 2 children and no work experience beyond part-time retail jobs. "I don't even know what I want to do," she admitted. "I just know I need to support my kids and never depend on someone else the way I depended on my husband." "That's a start," Carolyn said gently. "We'll help you figure out what you're good at and what opportunities exist. The important thing is you're here, you're trying. That takes courage." The program ran for 6 months. Intensive classes in business fundamentals, one-on-one mentorship, workshops with successful entrepreneurs, and individual consulting on business plans. Carolyn attended every session she could, often staying late to answer questions or provide additional guidance. Watching these women transform over the months reminded her of her own journey, the gradual building of confidence, the moment when they stopped apologizing for taking up space and started claiming their right to success, the shift from "I can't" to "I'll figure out how." In March, the first cohort graduated. 15 of the 20 women had completed viable business plans. The foundation provided seed funding ranging from $5,000 to $50,000, depending on the business scope and feasibility. Maria Santos opened her catering business, specializing in Latin American cuisine for corporate events and private parties. Within 3 months, she was booked solid. Linda Chen discovered a talent for bookkeeping and launched an accounting services firm for small businesses. Her client list grew steadily as word spread about her accuracy and affordability. At the graduation ceremony, Carolyn gave a speech to the women who'd completed the program. "6 months ago, many of you walked into this room uncertain of your capabilities," she began. "You'd been told you weren't smart enough, strong enough, or capable enough to build your own success. Some of you had been in relationships where you were systematically diminished. Others had simply never been given the opportunity to discover what you could do. She paused, looking at faces that now showed confidence and determination. You're leaving here with more than business plans and funding. You're leaving with proof that you're capable of extraordinary things, that the voices that told you otherwise were wrong, that you have value beyond what anyone else assigns to you. Several women were crying. Carolyn felt her own tears but didn't hide them. My grandmother spent 3 years teaching me who I actually was underneath the conditioning and diminishment. She gave me tools and opportunities, but more than that, she gave me belief in myself. That's what I hope this foundation has given you. Not just resources, but belief. Now go build something amazing. The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, Linda Chen approached Carolyn privately. Can I tell you something? Of course. When I left my husband, I was planning to kill myself, Linda said quietly. I couldn't see any way forward. No money, no skills, 2 kids depending on me. It seemed impossible. Then I saw the foundation's advertisement and thought maybe I'd try this first, just to see if there was any possibility I'd missed. She paused, wiping tears. This program saved my life. Not just financially, though that too, but by showing me I was capable of things I'd never imagined. My ex-husband told me for 12 years that I was stupid and useless. You showed me that was a lie. I'll never be able to repay that. Carolyn pulled her into a hug. You don't repay it. You pay it forward. You succeed, and then you help other women succeed. That's how this works. The foundation became Carolyn's most passionate project. The hotels were successful and meaningful, but the foundation transformed individual lives in ways that felt almost sacred. She increased the endowment, planning to run 4 cohorts per year, 80 women annually receiving comprehensive business education and startup funding. But the work also brought her face to face with the reality of what she'd survived. One evening, a woman named Rebecca Torres came to Carolyn's office for her intake interview. She was 32, thin to the point of frailty, with shadows under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept well in years. My husband controlled every aspect of my life, Rebecca said, her voice barely above a whisper. What I wore, who I talked to, where I went. He told me I was too stupid to work, too incompetent to manage money, too worthless to have friends. I believed him for 8 years. When I finally left, I had nothing. No money, no job history, no self-confidence. Carolyn listened, seeing her own past reflected in Rebecca's story. How did you get out? A neighbor noticed bruises, called the police. I was terrified to press charges, but the prosecutor was kind and patient. She helped me understand I wasn't crazy, I wasn't worthless, I wasn't the problem. He was sentenced to 3 years for assault. That's when I started thinking maybe I could rebuild my life. You can, Carolyn said firmly. I know because I did it. Different circumstances, but the same fundamental challenge. Learning to believe in myself after years of being told I was nothing. Rebecca looked at her with desperate hope. Did it work? Are you really okay now? Carolyn thought about the question seriously. I'm more than okay. I'm happy, successful, and free. But I won't lie, it was hard. There were days I wanted to give up, moments when the old voices in my head said I was kidding myself, that I'd never amount to anything. The difference was that I had people who contradicted those voices. My grandmother, my lawyer, eventually my partner, people who believed in me until I could believe in myself. That's what I need, Rebecca said. Someone to believe in me. Then you've found it, Carolyn said. We believe in you. Now let's help you build something that proves we're right. That evening, Carolyn came home to the loft and found Julian cooking dinner. The domestic simplicity of it still amazed her sometimes, that she could have this kind of normal, peaceful life after everything she'd survived. How was the intake interview? Julian asked, stirring pasta sauce. Difficult. She reminded me so much of who I was. Carolyn sat at the kitchen counter, accepting the glass of wine he poured for her. She has the same uncertainty, the same internalized belief that she's worthless. It's going to take months to help her rebuild her sense of self. You'll do it. You're good at this. I don't know if good at it is the right phrase. I just remember what it felt like to be her. That helps me understand what she needs. Julian came around the counter and pulled her into a gentle embrace. That empathy is exactly why the foundation works. You're not some distant philanthropist writing checks. You've lived what they're living. They ate dinner together, talking about the foundation's expansion plans and Julian's latest investment projects. Claire called from graduate school, chattering excitedly about her thesis on affordable housing integration in luxury developments. The conversation was easy, comfortable, full of the small intimacies that come from truly knowing another person. Later that night, lying in bed with Julian beside her, Carolyn stared at the ceiling and thought about the two versions of her life. The woman she'd been 5 years ago, trapped, diminished, slowly disappearing inside a controlling marriage, and the woman she was now, successful, free, building things that mattered. "What are you thinking about?" Julian asked sleepily. "How far I've come? How different this life is from what I thought was possible. Any regrets?" Carolyn considered the question seriously. "I regret the time I lost. 5 years where I could have been building something real instead of just surviving. But I don't regret the lessons I learned or the strength I discovered. Sometimes you have to break completely before you can rebuild into something better." "Your grandmother knew that," Julian said. "That's why she spent 3 years preparing you instead of just handing you money and hoping for the best. She gave me the greatest gift anyone ever gave me. She taught me to save myself." Carolyn rolled over to face him in the darkness. "Now I get to give that gift to others. That feels like the best possible use of everything I survived." Julian kissed her softly. "I love you. Not despite what you survived, but including it. All of it. Every difficult piece that made you who you are. I love you too, for letting me stay myself even while building a life with you. For understanding that I need independence as much as I need partnership." They fell asleep tangled together, two people who'd both survived loss and learned to trust again. Chapter 10. The Woman Who Chose Joy. 2 years passed like a dream that refused to end, each day better than the last in ways Carolyn had stopped believing were possible. She stood on the rooftop of Beatrice House, the name she'd officially changed Heritage Grand to, honoring the woman who'd made everything possible, watching the sun descend toward the horizon. The city spread below in all directions, lights beginning to flicker on as evening approached. 9 hotels now, 4,000 jobs, 800 affordable housing units. 200 women graduated from the Foundation's program, most of them running successful businesses. The hospitality industry had begun adopting elements of her model, proving that profit and purpose could coexist. Julian's arms came around her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder in a gesture that had become comfortable ritual. "The Seattle property deal closed today," he told her. "That makes 10 hotels." Carolyn leaned back against him, feeling the solid comfort of his presence. 10 hotels. And the Foundation is expanding to 3 new cities next year, Portland, Austin, and Chicago. Your grandmother would say you're just getting started. She would. Carolyn smiled at the thought. She'd probably already have plans for 20 more properties and a lecture prepared about not resting on achievements. They stayed there as the sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Below them, Beatrice House bustled with evening activity, guests checking in, the restaurant filling with reservations, community programs wrapping up their daily sessions. Downstairs, the hotel hosted an evening celebrating the Foundation's 3rd anniversary. 300 women filled the ballroom, current participants, graduates, mentors, and supporters. Carolyn had insisted on keeping it intimate, no press, just real people sharing real stories. She took the stage wearing a midnight blue dress that Claire had helped her choose. Looking out at faces both familiar and new, she saw her own journey reflected in theirs. 3 years ago, she began, her voice steady and clear, I stood in a boardroom while 2 people tried to steal my inheritance, my dignity, and my future. They told me I was nothing, that I came from nothing, that I needed them because I was too incompetent to manage my own life. The room was absolutely silent, every woman understanding exactly what she meant. I could have believed them. For years I almost did. I made myself smaller, quieter, less, because it seemed easier than fighting. But my grandmother saw what I couldn't see. She saw capability I'd buried, strength I'd forgotten, potential I'd never known I had. Carolyn paused, feeling the weight of her grandmother's absence, while also feeling her presence in everything this moment represented. She didn't just leave me money, she spent 3 years teaching me how to build something real, and when those two people tried to take everything from me, I didn't fight back because I wanted revenge. I fought back because I wanted life, real life, my life. She looked at Rebecca Torres sitting in the front row, the woman who'd come to her intake interview so broken she'd been planning suicide. Rebecca now ran a successful graphic design business and mentored other women in the Foundations program. She was smiling, confident, transformed. This foundation isn't about charity, Carolyn continued. It's about showing women what they're actually capable of when someone gives them tools and opportunity. When someone believes in them until they can believe in themselves. When someone proves that the voices that told them they were nothing were lying. She gestured to the women in the room. You've all done extraordinary things. You've built businesses, supported families, created opportunities for others. You've proven that you're not what anyone said you were. You're what you decided to become. That's the real transformation, not just financial success, but reclaiming your right to define yourself. The applause started softly, then grew until it filled the room. Women stood, some with tears in their eyes, all of them understanding the journey because they'd lived their own versions of the same story. After the speech, after the conversations and the exchange of stories and the formation of new connections, Carolyn found Julian waiting by the entrance. Claire was with him, having driven in from graduate school where she was finishing her doctorate in urban planning. That was incredible, Claire said, hugging her. I'm definitely using your foundation model as part of my research. The integration of business development with social support, it's revolutionary. Just promise you'll build something even better than I did, Carolyn replied. That's the plan. They drove to the loft, their home now, completely shared after 2 years of learning to build a life together. The domestic simplicity of making dinner together, talking about their days, existing in comfortable silence, still felt like a miracle to Carolyn. Later, alone in their bedroom, Julian asked the question he'd been asking periodically for years. Are you happy? Carolyn thought about it seriously, as she always did. I spent years trying to prove I was strong enough, smart enough, worthy enough. First to Anthony, then to myself. I don't do that anymore. She moved to the window, looking out at the city lights reflecting off the river. I'm just living now, building things I love with people I love, creating something meaningful that will outlast me. Yes, I'm happy. Finally, actually, truly happy. Julian came to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. That's the real victory, not destroying them, but becoming someone they could never touch or understand or diminish. Carolyn turned in his arms to face him. It's not victory at all, it's freedom. She thought about Anthony sometimes, serving his sentence in a federal facility. She'd heard through Preston that he worked in the prison library, teaching other inmates to read. It was the first genuinely helpful thing he'd done in years. She felt nothing when she thought of him. No anger, no satisfaction, no connection. He was simply someone who existed in her past, irrelevant to her present or future. Diane had disappeared into quiet obscurity in Florida, working as a cashier at a grocery store, her social pretensions stripped away by consequence and reality. And Carolyn? She was Carolyn Jennings, the name she'd been born with, the name her grandmother had carried with pride. She'd built an empire not through inheritance alone, but through vision, work, and determination. 10 hotels and counting. Thousands of people employed. Hundreds of families housed affordably. 300 women helped through her foundation, most of them now running successful businesses. an entire industry gradually shifting toward more ethical models because she'd proved they could be profitable. The next morning, Carolyn woke early and went for a run along the Riverwalk as sunrise painted the sky. She passed other early risers, people heading to work, students rushing to class, couples walking dogs, ordinary people living ordinary lives. She was one of them now. Successful, yes. Wealthy, certainly. But also just a woman who'd survived something terrible and built something beautiful from the wreckage. At Beatrice's house, she spent the morning in meetings about the 11th property. Architects presented designs, community leaders discussed neighborhood needs, financial advisors reviewed projected costs and revenues. It was complex, challenging work that required her full attention. She loved every minute of it. Lunch was with 3 women entrepreneurs from the foundation's second cohort, all of them discussing the challenges of building ethical businesses in competitive industries. They traded advice, shared contacts, and laughed about still being asked whether their husbands approved of their business decisions. "My response is always the same," Maria Santos said. Her catering business now so successful, she'd hired 5 employees. "I don't have a husband. I have a business, and yes, I approve of all my own decisions." Carolyn smiled, remembering when she couldn't have said something like that, when she'd needed permission for everything, believed she was incapable of making choices, existed in the shadow of someone else's life. That woman was gone. In her place was someone powerful, confident and kind, someone who used strength to lift others instead of dominating them. Evening found her and Julian on their balcony under the stars, wrapped in a blanket against the cool air. They sat in comfortable silence, her head on his shoulder, both of them quiet and content. "What are you thinking about?" Julian asked eventually. "How grateful I am, not just for what I built, but for who helped me build it. Preston, who protected me legally, Mr. Ashford, who believed in my vision, the women in my foundation who trusted me with their stories, you, who loved me while letting me stay myself." She lifted her head to look at him. "I didn't do this alone. That's important to remember." "No one does anything truly meaningful alone," Julian said. "But you were the architect. We just helped construct what you designed." Carolyn kissed him then, soft and slow, filled with gratitude and love and the profound relief of being completely, authentically herself with someone who cherished exactly who she was. The stars wheeled overhead. The city hummed below. Somewhere out there, women were still fighting battles similar to what Carolyn had faced, trapped in diminishing relationships, underestimated in their capabilities, told they were less than they truly were. But maybe some of them would hear Carolyn's story. Maybe they'd see what she'd built and realize they could build it too. Maybe they'd find their own version of Grandmother Beatrice, or become that person for someone else. She thought about the speech she'd given earlier, about fighting back not for revenge but for life. That was the truth she'd finally internalized. Victory wasn't about destroying enemies. Victory was choosing to live fully, authentically, joyfully, despite everything that tried to stop you. The empire continued to grow, the vision continued to expand, the foundation continued to transform lives. And Carolyn Jennings, the woman who'd been told she was nothing and chose to become everything, sat under the stars with the man she loved and felt complete. Not because she'd won some battle, not because she'd proven something to anyone, but because she'd learned the most important lesson of all. True power isn't about control or domination or revenge. True power is the freedom to build the life you want, to help others build theirs, and to do it all with joy rather than bitterness. That was the greatest triumph of all, and it was only the beginning.